This is Blair, your cancer care bear. No hair, don't care. All faith, no fear. And you are now in the Blair podcast. Welcome to the vibe. I don't know why there's a stigma on women with daddy issues. I put a poll up the other day on my social media as far as what was going to be my next topic of discussion. As many people that viewed it on Instagram, perhaps Twitter, Facebook, I only got one vote. One vote. And that was on Facebook. And I appreciate that one vote. Though it wasn't my next topic of discussion, I want to address it. First, let's define what daddy issues even mean. Okay? So, technically, I'll go online, do my research, Google it, whatever. It is an informal phrase for the psychological challenges resulting from an absence of abnormal relationship with one's father, often manifesting in a distrust of or sexual desire for men who act as father figures. And the reason why I said why is it the stigma on women who have daddy issues is because we have to act like we can't act like women are the only ones with daddy issues. Now, granted, when I talk about daddy issues, I just don't mean that absentee or abnormal relationship with one's father, but also being a dad in itself. Me, I have daddy issues. My dad was in the military. He was in my life all the time. He wasn't always around, but he was always there. When those of you who is a military brat or has been in the military or who are relatively a child of a parent who travels a lot may be able to relate. I love my father. I respect my father. I thought about calling him, but I'll save that for another time, another episode, because I want to express and open up to you all listening, for those of you who may not understand what I'm going to say. Right? So, my dad, my father, he is the second oldest to my grandparents, and he is the only boy out of the 6 kids that my grandparents have. Now, and ironically enough, I have only one girl cousin that my aunts had. But to stick on point, my granddad, I forgot exactly what he did, but old fashioned, born in the earlier generations of the 1900s, I believe, like 1930, 40 or whatnot. But he was born in Virginia, and he was the oldest of the children that my great grandmother had, Big Mama. But anyway, my granddad was a working man, old fashioned, like, go to work, come home, wife cooks, clean, whatnot. My grandmother, beautiful, God-fearing woman, great woman of God, great woman, great mother, great grandmother. And I was able to experience that, just the fact that I remember when my granddad used to leave. He would, and like I said again, this was, I was born in 87. I was born in, growing up in the 90s and coming back and forth from Virginia to DC. It was a lot where I didn't realize it until just a couple weeks ago. I'm like, I know we are influenced by what's around us. And just like what I mentioned on every other episode is about, as far as how music impact us, our surroundings influence us as well. My father being the only male, aside from my granddad, but my granddad being a working father, and like I said, he was old fashioned, old style, like I said, respect, manners, honor, work hard, take care of your family. Now, like I said, my granddad was a man's man, just like my dad is a man's man. But my thing is to be around women and like pretty much your whole childhood. And mind you, I don't know exactly how often my granddad had days off, but me being the type of man that I am, in all respects to my mom, who had, I'm not even going to get into how many brothers and sisters that she had, but I get a lot of my characteristics from my father, from my dad. And it's not bad, it's not all bad, but being that men are traditionally masculine and very much strong-minded and aggressive, I will say this. I had the honor and privilege to be raised by my parents, and my dad being in the military. Again, same thing is, I had a brother, but a lot of my characteristics stem from my dad, who was around most women, growing up. I mean, I want to probably say akin maybe before, like he had friends, but just in the household, just in the house, being around 5 sisters, one who's older, and then the other 4 who is younger, and then my grandmother. And the kind-heartedness, the sensitivity, the emotional side of a human being, that sense, that characteristic of, I guess, the feminine side of a man. I would say of course I would get it from my mother, but I would say a lot of my characteristics come from my dad, where I didn't have, like, I was around my brother, then my sister who was older, but it was just something that dawned on me. I said, man, I was thinking, I have maybe my sensitivity, because again, those of you who know me knows that I'm a very emotional, outspoken, very headstrong, very opinionated, but a sensitive guy. Now, some can blame it on my sign. I am a Cancer, but my father and mother, but my father taught me how to be a man. I believe only a man can show a man how to be a man. So a lot of my man traits that I have, 100% my dad, but those same traits, I'm in touch with my sensitive side. Now, the reason why I say it's daddy issue just means is that sometimes when I need to be strong, when I need to show aggressiveness, I show compassion, I show concern, because maybe this is part of my own personality, but me being able to empathize and understand women to a certain degree. Of course, me having a sister factors in. Of course, me having my mother in my life factors in. Of course, me having respect for all people factors in. But like, again, my father was the one who taught me, be a gentleman, chivalry isn't dead, or at the door. My father. My mother didn't, tell me about opening a woman's door. I just always thought it was just kind of like a polite thing to do. But my father deliberately, I seen him, he opened a woman's door. And it's like, I'm a father. And it's like I see those same traits, because my son, after, aside from myself, there was a time, as my son's only 4 now, but there was a time, before me and my ex-wife separation, it was just me. I was the only male influence in his life. Of course, he had, his grandparents, but they're out of state. My brother, he's doing his thing, but, just as far as home-wise, he has an older sister, has his mom, then, he goes, whenever he's with me, I show him those same values and raise him the same way, that as best as I can, that I feel is best, that my father and mother taught me. But as a man, and being that my dad only had 2 boys, and accepted and raised my older sister as his own, but the fact that he only had 2 boys, my grandfather only had 1 boy, me only having 1 son, it's a lot where I think about, the same daddy issues that I have. Like I said, it's not in a negative connotation. What I'm meaning is that I will my son will experience more like the same thing that I experienced growing up. Being there for him, always being there, but not always being around. No, my son was almost 3. Almost 3. Yeah, he was born in 2016. And we separated. Yeah, so he was 2. He was 2. And now just thinking about it now, it's like, we live in the same city. I work. He does, school, virtual learning, and whatnot. So I get him when I can. If not every weekend, then every other weekend. But with COVID, it was a lot. Like, again, we gotta keep it a stack. It's safety. He does not live with me. And in spite of my circumstances, same thing. It's limited. But things get better. I get them. And I remember when my dad was out to sea before him and my parents split up. He came. We would do things. As a family. And like I said, I always remember my dad. Like I said, he was very stern. Very stern on discipline. Very stern on his faith. Like I said, a man of God. A gentleman, nice guy, kind-hearted guy. Very giving. And not saying that isn't manly, but just based on society, just the society standards. He's not a pushover, but not in a sense of the average aggressive, what's that word, misogynistic type of individual, which is good. So even when I think about women with daddy issues, I say, okay, based on definition, women who has an irregular, abnormal relationship with their dads, whether they're not being there. There's women who has been, molested by their dads, mom's boyfriends, stepdads, and they'll have a attraction to older men, toxic men, maybe even men who are financially set to where, like, hey, they come from a lot of money, I guess to say. So that's what I see when I think of when the world try to chastise women who has daddy issues, men who have daddy issues like myself. It's more of fathers not being there, so they try to take a lot of and let me read it. Fathers who were in their lives, they'll try their best to not be the man that their father was, and they might make those same mistakes. It's maybe somebody can fact check me on this, again, you are in the Blair, and this is all just expression. This is all just getting a connection with your inner self, me, and I want to be clear. I have friends whose fathers wasn't in their lives, and some it showed, others it's like, oh, you would never have known. Their mothers did a great job. I'm one who still believes that you need a male role model. I'm not even going to sit here and go too far and say that men, boys, need their fathers or and stuff, their fathers in their lives. I'm just going to say you need a male role model. And I would preferably say positive male role model. And when men don't have that, they might lean more towards, their mothers or the men that they see in the streets or on television. Like I said, my grandfather was a man's man. He worked. I wish I had a chance to get to know him more. Both my grandfathers, really. But I had the pleasure to meet both my grandfathers, and I was old enough to remember a lot. And then my dad's dad passed a couple years ago. Rest in peace to him. And he was a great man and a better man of God, a better man of faith. And I remember him working. But we all have our ways, like most. So like I said, I have to take my hat off to my grandfather for taking care of his family. I didn't have a chance to ask him how was it raising 5 girls and 1 boy, working full-time job, being a husband, and also being a minister. When you're a minister, whether big or small, that's a lot. That's a lot of responsibility as well. And to some people, you will be you are like a father figure to most. Like I know some people, like they're like friends of the family, and they would call my grandfather pop or dad and whatnot because he was a father to them. And then even with my dad, my dad being in that same having that same character, like I said, with my sister, then I have my stepbrother and sister who my dad accepted as his own, and they accepted him as his own. Even though they was always already coming in age, but it was like not most men. I don't know a lot of men like my dad where they will raise someone else's child, accept someone else's child their own. They will not, they will not look at someone else's child as their own. You're just a good person to do, good type of person to do that. I'm the same way. Though me and my ex-wife is no longer together, my son's sisters, that's my daughter. Those are my daughters still. I helped raise my ex-wife's second oldest, and some of my daddy issues. Like I said, they're not negative. I think the world might look at it as, as commendable, but it's just natural to me. Before I go, I wanna touch on something real quick. Sometimes we inherited certain things about our parents that we might not even realize. We might, again, it's called post-traumatic stresses and generational curses and things like that, but it's interesting that we can have certain traits about us that our parents have and not even know. And the reason why we won't know is because, like I mentioned, there are people whose father wasn't in their lives or don't have a relationship with their father at all, and I had witnessed and heard things to where it's like they were like their mothers or people who do know the fathers and dads and stuff, that the child is just like their parents, their mother, their dad, or whatnot, and we might not even know them or ever seen them witness that. That's isn't that interesting? That we can hold the same traits as our parents that we never met, seen, or had a relationship with. It always mind boggles me, because I'll be like, there are things that are, children are visual learners. They learn what they see. You can tell your child certain things, and they may listen. But if you tell them something, but you're doing the opposite of what you're telling them to do, they don't realize sometimes that, hey, you're an adult. They just know that, hey, you're older, you're bigger, but they see they might tell you to, your parents might tell you to, hey, don't speak in this manner, don't cuss, don't tell somebody to shut up or da da da. And they might hear you do it and might see you do it, and then they'll end up repeating after you, because again, they are visual learners. So it's always interesting when I hear stories about how someone is so much alike their parents, yet they don't even know their parents have a relationship with them. I know for me, like I mentioned, certain morals and values, I have the same as my dad. I mean, of course, like chivalry isn't dead. I mean, that stuff is learned. My dad told me that, but there was something that I remember how people always say, I look just like my father, and I was like, maybe because we're chunky and got the same body shape or whatnot, but there was a picture I saw, and I'm like, oh, this was the one picture that I seen where I was like, oh, that really looks like me, and it was a picture of my dad with his little mustache, holding a plate of food, holding me in his arms, and I said, oh, that's kind of like, that looked exactly like I was holding my son. Like I lie to you now, I cannot find that picture. But I remember, and I know even with, certain things. Like I have a lot of characteristics of my mom as well. But I always say it's interesting where, and this is something that kind of like I didn't think about at first, but like I said, my dad was in my life. I had a relationship with my dad. Or I always had a relationship with my dad. Like I said, he was in the military, so his absence wasn't due to him not wanting to take responsibility. His absence dealt with work and, being in the military. It's not like he was someone who was never around, and same thing with me. My absence in my son's life deals with a lot of me and his mom not being in the same house anymore. But I am still actively involved in my son's life. But one thing that I noticed and realized, I said, we hear this saying, you are your mother's child, you are your father's child. But it's like, it seems like God already knows. Now you can hold so much weight in your child's life, being in your child's life, where your child is going to have the same standards and have the same values and principles as you. But I noticed that even when I say this to some of my nieces and some other people that's in my life now, where it's like we are so much like the parents that was in our life that we are the parents that were not in our life. And again, that might not be true for everyone, but it is fairly safe to say that you may inherit a lot of the traits, a lot of the personality of the parent that you are least likely or least around or least likely know. But like I said, it's one of those slippery slopes. But yeah, it's just something that I think about because, again, I mentioned I had all these people that saw my poll, and the one person who voted for daddy issues was a very special friend of mine. And, maybe because there may have been some daddy issues there, but again, I think that we have to point out how men can also have daddy issues. And again, I'm not going to sit here and say that there's a negative stigma to it, but that's how the world looks at it. But again, I'm only one person. I just wanted to express that as a dad, as a father, you don't appreciate your father as much until you become one. Experience is the best teacher, but you only can be as lucky to learn how to be a great parent without, being raised a certain way. I was just blessed to have, I had positive male role models. Like I mentioned, my granddad, my dad, and even like my stepdad. I was double blessed. And same thing with my mothers and stuff. So it's not always easy. However, sometimes we Sometimes we get caught up in the world's expectation of you and what you're supposed to do. Like me personally, hey, I don't really agree with child support or you know being a parent when you're not ready or prepared or set, but I am 100% an advocate for taking accountability and responsibility. I think certain things need to be discussed. I think the way we parent also takes an account of whether or not we wanted to be parents. Some things that we are taught as children, we carry with us through the rest of our life, and then we put those same principles and values into our parenting. Some may not even be right, but we can only do our best to be the best parent that we can be. Being that I have a son, everything that I went through in life, as a son, as a brother. And I'm the youngest my mom had and the youngest my dad had, and so I'm the baby boy. I'm the cancer, I'm the Mr. Sensitive, empathetic, understanding, giving, all that loving, cuddly, all that stuff. And I will say that I might not 100% do everything that my parents taught me or raised me to do. And I might not parent my son the same way that I was parent, but I definitely respect my parents to the fullest. I wasn't always the model son, especially to my mom, who, like I said, I lived with my mother, growing up, even after my parents, separated. We had, the normal, me and my brother had the normal weekends, holidays. Sometimes we would go to DC and do all that stuff. Like I said, I have a great relationship with my family. It could definitely be better, but like I said, my dad was around. He was in my life. And like I said, maybe part of him being the only boy growing up in his household while my grandfather was working, providing, a lot of his personality traits may consist of who he is. And therefore that allowed him to instill those same things in me. Like I can't stress this enough. I mentioned this in a earlier podcast that I did last year. You gotta respect black women. Love them. Women are made complete, as far as I'm concerned. Despite their own daddy issues, we have to take into account that something stems from somewhere. I will just say this. If you're involved with a woman with daddy issues, and maybe she don't want to discuss it, you have one or two choices. You can show her different, and when I mean different, I mean you might have to go the extra mile to show her that, hey, I am not your dad, even though that's the standard that most women look at. I am not your dad. or you can cut your losses and go about your business. I think men who demasculate themselves to pander women might need to question their daddy issues. You can very much respect and have compassion for women without having to devalue yourself. It might take some time. You might have to go through the motions to learn how to do that, because I know I'm a witness of that. But the most important relationships, well, the human relationship between a man and a woman, I believe, has a lot to do with the relationship with your parents. I think sometimes we have to look at that relationship with our parents, and if you have a companion, look at that relationship that you are familiar with, the relationships that you were around. It's okay to communicate now. I know that well, as far as the black community, the black families are concerned, we repeat some of the same issues from those that came before us, not intentionally, but I think when we don't get to the bottom or get to the root of the issues of what might have led to a dysfunction, then we repeat them. Like I say, like my daddy issues aren't negative. Of course they could probably be better, because I'm a daddy now, and it's kind of, and I was a daddy before I was a father, but it's I think it's very vital, for men, especially black men, to take a look at their relationships with their dads, their fathers, and take a look at themselves onto, how they was brought up, how they was feeling, how they felt. I have to do better in writing things down, writing down how I feel. I remember telling my dad, how much I appreciate him and respect him. Me being a mindful individual, someone who actually does consider all aspects of the decisions that he makes. I think about certain things that I would have liked for my, like dad have done. It's a little bit selfish. I would have been like, hey, why did you join the military? I mean, he had joined it before I was born, but a selfish part of me is like, why did you go in the military? I'm thinking like, did you want children? You gotta, we all think about providing, and some might agree, some might disagree, but the best thing you can be for your kids is present. Now you do have to work and provide in order to take care of your family. However, I think to me, just my opinion, I do believe that if you gotta, like, again, when we have this by any means necessary mentality, that should mean, and by any means necessary as well, meaning that, hey, I need to find out where I can go to be close to my family, and also work where I can. That's money. Make enough money. I'm not gonna sit here and act like money isn't important, but I do know that just by even with my son, when I have my son, my son is a lot like his mom and a lot like myself. He will definitely tell you how he feels. He says all the time, he just randomly say like, "Daddy," and I'd be like, "Yes," and it's, "I love you," and then sometimes in some retrospect as well, to avoid going to bed, he will try to hug his way out of going to sleep. Like, "Yo, come downstairs. I just want to hug you." So I do advise women, but mainly men, to take a look at your daddy issues and figure out if it's a positive problem that can be resolved, or a negative notation that needs to be eliminated. But either way, men has daddy issues just as much as women have daddy issues. And whether it affects us the same way or affects us in a different way, I think it definitely needs to be pointed out just as much as women's are. But like most days, as always, continue to stay prosperous, positive, and productive. That's all I got to say about that. Blair.